Welcome everybody. My name is Lohit GN. I'm from Telerik. Today we are going to be looking at scaffolding in OneASP.NET. It's basically an overview of scaffolding. It's very basic webinar today. Level, I can say this is level 100-ish. If any of you in the audience has already done the scaffolding or already know OneASP.NET well and good, so this is just to get those people a primer on where ASP.NET is heading. What is the change in ASP.NET in ASP.NET with respect to Visual Studio 2013 or .NET 4.5.1? So we're going to be focusing on only two things. One is what is OneASP.NET, and then scaffolding. How do you do scaffolding in OneASP.NET? So a little bit about myself. If you have been a regular to this webinars, by now you would know about me. But if there is anybody who is new to this webinar, you're attending this webinar for the first time, my name is Lohit GN. I'm a developer evangelist with Telerik. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in the area of ASP.NET and IIS. I wrote my first book last year. It's based on Windows Phone application development using F#. This is my official email ID, lohit.nagaraj@telerik.com. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, this is one way. Another way is I'm always on Twitter. So if you tweet to me, I'll pretty much answer you back. I blog at my personal blog site, which is kashypas.com. Also, this is our official email website, telerik.com. And myself, my colleague Dhananjay Kumar, who is another evangelist here in India, and our country head Abhishek Kant, we three keep writing in telerikhelper.net. So this is basically a blog site which we created where we kind of free flow our thoughts on how do you achieve a very specific scenario in Telerik technology. So this is kind of thing. So telerik.com/blogs is the official blog site of Telerik. So that's how that's me on the right hand side in the photo picture. So that's how I look. So that's about me. And many people have been asking for the schedule. So this is the Telerik India webinar schedule. So as I said, today is January 30th, 3 to 4 p.m. We are doing scaffolding in OneASP.NET. Next 3 webinars for February is February 13th. We'll be doing Kendo Mobile UI tips and tricks. February 20th, mobile and web services testing with Test Studio. February 27th, 3 to 4, take your reports to any screen with Telerik reporting. So all you need to do is go to telerik.net, telerikhelper.net, and on the right-hand side there's a category menu. So there pick up the category called announcement. If you look at your chat window, we already have the URL pasted there. It's telerikhelper.net/category/announcement. So there you'll see that every quarter we release the schedule. We already lined up all the topics, but we release the schedule, the timeline, the dates and the topics every quarter. We don't put it in one shot. Rather, we keep writing a small blog post every quarter saying like, hey, this is the timetable for this particular quarter, like that. So in March, we'll have one more blog post where it talks about March and April webinars. It will put the dates and the time and the topic and the registration link. So that's how we normally do it. So as I said, a lot of webinars even into 2014. If you're interested to know new things or interested to know about Telerik technologies, I would say this is the place to be. So Thursdays 3 to 4, just spend 1 hour with us. Having said that, here's today's agenda. I'm going to be looking very brief at what is OneASP.NET. I'm not going to spend much time here because we already have done a similar webinar which spoke completely on what is OneASP.NET. So we're going to be taking a little bit of understanding of what is OneASP.NET. Then we're going to get into understanding scaffolding. We'll look at web form scaffolding, then we'll look at MVC scaffolding, and then we'll look at web API scaffolding. So this is how the agenda I have kind of thought about for today. So let's get going. So OneASP.NET, we have been developing on pretty much. I started my .NET career or Microsoft technology career way back in 2001 when I started with ASP, then slowly graduated to ASP.NET, and then I've been on ASP.NET since then. 2001, somewhere around April, May is when I started. So that's .NET 1.1. We had Visual Studio 2002, I believe, or something like that. So Visual Studio 2000. So that's when ASP.NET was also there. So it was a pretty cool technology at that point of time. Now, why suddenly, we're saying one ASP.NET? We already had one ASP.NET, right? So if that is the same question that you have in your mind, just stay with me for another couple of slides. I'll try to tell you what exactly is this. Well, one ASP.NET is simply unifying the experience of ASP.NET technology. When people talk about ASP.NET technology, I always tell them, be specific. What were you trying to develop? Was it a web form? Was it a MVC? Was it web API? So what were you trying to do, right? Prior to Visual Studio 2013 or prior to .NET 4.5.1, this is pretty much what you had the dilemma. When you wanted to create a web application, you would be given a choice which says web forms, MVC, web API. What do you want to do? Right? If you had picked up MVC, if you had picked up web forms, you couldn't bring in MVC to web forms, right? With one ASP.NET, that's all changed. Now we're going to get one unified experience of ASP.NET technology. So yes, you are creating ASP.NET. That's it. Full stop. You will create a web application, but rather, later you can add in, the symptoms of web forms, symptoms of web, MVC, symptoms of web API. So now it's like, you go ahead, you don't worry about anything else, just say you want to create a web application and then tell me what features do you want. Do you want features of web forms? Do you want features of MVC? Do you want features of web API? So that's why if you look at the second bullet point, it says mix and match. I can create web forms and then later say I want a web API now, or I want a MVC controller now. So start with web forms, add MVC, or start with MVC and add web API. If you go back to Visual Studio 2012 and then look at the new project dialog that comes up, you had MVC had a different project type, web API had a different project type, right? That's the confusion that it was there. But now it's all gone. It's only one and only one ASP.NET. So that's what's going to be going forward. So here's ASP.NET options in 2012. It tells you when you go and say, hey, I want to create a ASP.NET web application. So you'll say file, new project, and then you'll select Visual C# and then web. It will say, okay, boss, what do you want to create? You want to create empty web? You want to create web forms? You want to create MVC? You want to create dynamic data? You want to create server controls? Blah, blah, blah. It's pretty much kind of too much of choice, if you ask me. So now what has happened is with one ASP.NET in Visual Studio 2013, if you go ahead and then say file, new project, Visual C# and web, that's it. You're going to get only one choice, and that is I want to create ASP.NET web application. So that's the choice that that's the option that you will get. No more confusion, no more too many choices to confuse you. So once you select the ASP.NET web application, then it's going to ask you, okay, what do you want to have? Basically, I know you want to create a ASP.NET web application, but what kind of features do you want in your ASP.NET? Do you want web forms? Do you want to create an empty? Do you want to create? Do you want to start with any one of these guys? Web forms, MVC, web API. Now let me bring up my Zoom it because I want to show something. Okay, so now here notice that here I want you to pay close attention to these guys. So these are the templates. I'm telling that, hey, now I want to create an ASP.NET web application, but I want to start out with web forms, or I want to start out with an MVC flavor, or I want to start with a web API flavor. Plus, notice an option here. It says, hey, I know you wanted to start with a template called web forms, but do you want to add any of these guys also? Meaning, should I add folders and core references for MVC when you're creating web forms? Should I add core folders and core references of web API when you start, the web forms? Plus, you can add unit testing also. It will go ahead and then say, hey, do you want to create a unit test also for you? I can add a unit test project for you. So that's what this is. Plus, you can also decide on what is the authentication that you need. Since I've selected empty, it says no authentication. But if I go and say web forms, we will do a live demo of this. But the main idea that what I want to talk about here is with OneASP.NET, it's all about you can come back and then say, I want to create a web application with the web forms template, but I also want MVC feature or a Web API feature, or I want both MVC and Web API feature. So now in one ASP.NET application, you can have web forms, MVC, Web API, everybody living together happily. They're all there. It's a happy end story. So that's something about one ASP.NET. If you understand this, that's much more enough. If somebody asks you what is one ASP.NET, you should be able to say that, hey, one ASP.NET is all about a unified experience of creating web application. Now I can have web forms. Now I can have MVC. Now I can have Web API features in one, in one particular application, in one particular web application. If somebody is asking, like, why choose an empty project template? Well, you just want to get that bare bone ASP.NET references in your project, and then you may want to add a web forms, or you may want to MVC. It's up to you. If you're not decided, what you can do is you start with it empty, and in the empty, as the name says, it is empty. It doesn't have anything other than the core ASP.NET pipeline, the core ASP.NET web.configurations, everything set up for you. You can right click and say add a web forms, in an empty project too. You can right click and say I want an MVC controller. Yeah, you can do everything. That's what one ASP.NET is all about. So we're going to see all those things. So that's pretty much about one ASP.NET. So let me give you that experience. So this is Visual Studio 2013. I have a Visual Studio 2013 Ultimate edition, but whatever I do can be, it will work in any features. So I can come back here and then say File, New, Project. So let's give it a little bit of couple of seconds, because it's the first time I booted my system today, so it's taking a little bit of time. So as you can see, I have selected Visual C#, Web, and I get only one choice. Don't worry about the other three choices, because we have our own Turric the Visual Studio integration. So these are all the extensions that we have. But when it comes to ASP.NET, so there's only one option which says ASP.NET Web Application. So if you select that, and I'll just select somewhere, give it a name, give it a location, and then I say okay. Now you'll see what happens. So this is the dialog that you will get. This is the dialog that I was showing. So by default, whatever, in this dialog you have this template selection. Notice what happens in the bottom. Okay, let me go to live zoom. So now when I select empty, right, the add folders and core references for, it's allowing me to do this. So meaning I can say that my template is empty, but I want all these features. Or let me unselect all these guys and then go back here, and then I can click on web forms. Notice the web forms got grayed out because it knows I've selected web forms. Now it allows me the option to select MVC or select Web API or both of them. Similarly, when I select MVC, notice that MVC is grayed out because it knows this is the template. But I can say that, hey, this is MVC template, but I also want the web forms features included, or I want Web API feature included. So basically, you can mix and match. Plus, when I select web forms, I can actually change authentications. So I can say individual user accounts, meaning you will have a SQL Server database or whatever, your backend, and then you will store a table, and the table will have all the the regular sign up data or the login data. Or you can go for organizational accounts. That is your we allow you to the ASP.NET will allow you to authenticate users with Active Directory or Windows Azure Active Directory, on the cloud, or Office 365. So you can actually decide what you want to do, on-premise or cloud or whatever it is. Or you can directly say, no, this is a Windows authentication, meaning you should be in a domain. So all those things are available now. Let me get out of live zoom. So now this is the experience that you get when you create one ASP.NET application, now one web application in Visual Studio 2013. Okay, now let's quickly look at something about scaffolding, and then we'll dive into the demo. Scaffolding is nothing but it's a code generation framework that is already baked into Visual Studio, or the ASP.NET tooling has this code generation framework. So what does it do? It's basically a pre-installed generators for MVC and Web API. Well, if anybody has played here with the Visual Studio 2013 preview or bits very early, there was actually a scaffolder for web forms, meaning we could generate a web forms, create, update, read, delete web forms using the scaffolding technology. But in the RTM, it was pulled back because of some technical glitches. But currently, what we have is a pre-installed generators for MVC and Web API. You can pretty much create a complete controller, views, everything with just one click, with one dialog, and then it goes ahead and creates everything for you. So that's pretty much a pre-installed generator for a Web API and MVC. What does it do is it quickly adds code that interacts with your model. Basically in an MVC, what you do is you have your model, you have your controller talking to the model, maybe instantiating the model, getting the data, pushing the model to the view, all those things. So yeah, so with this generators, what it does is it quickly adds all those codes. It reduces the amount of time for standard data operations. Meaning, if you have a particular entity and then you want to provide a CRUD, how many times will you handcraft, or how many times will you create it manually, the create screen, the update screen, the delete screen, the read screen, right, the listing screen, correct? So what these generators do is, or the scaffolding framework in ASP.NET does is, it will quickly add these codes and reduce your time that you have to write those standard operations or standard data screens, right? So that's what scaffolding is all about. So let's quickly get into web form scaffolding and then try to take a look at that. So what I'm going to do is I'm now selecting ASP.NET Web Application. I will say OK, and maybe I'll show you the empty ones. We'll see what happens with this. So let's go ahead with create an empty one. So just give me a couple of seconds, because it's getting primed up. I said file new project, so I have a lot of things going on. My GoToMeeting is running, so Visual Studio will be a little bit unresponsive for a while. Ramesh, you're asking for what kind of pre-installed generators are having inbuilt. So inbuilt generators that are available are for MVC and Web API. So meaning you can create a area, you can create a view, you can create a controller with an empty definition, you can create controller with read-write definitions, you can create controller plus view plus entity framework data context. For Web API, similar, you can create a controller, with empty, you can create a controller with the read write, all those things. So that is an empty template. As you can see, there's only, you would have find the code. So now what you see with an empty, what I can do is I can come back here and then say, hey, I want to add those of you who are having problem with your audio, I would suggest please go to options, preferences, and then try to look at the audio settings on your end, because many people have said, like, their my audio is coming clear. So can you please check your audio settings? My audio, I have pumped up my microphone completely. You just have to go to File, Preferences, Audio, and then just check, if there's any problem with it showing. Yeah, my microphone is completely full, 100%. So as you can see here in the screen, in the Solution Explorer on the right-hand side, the web application is empty, but I can go in and right-click and say Add, and this is the new thing that you will see now. In the context menu, when you say right-click and Add, you will see that new item, existing item, and then there will be something called as new scaffolded item. So that's what you will see. Okay, maybe my system is completely overloaded, so let me shut down a couple of Visual Studio instances, because I had kept 2 Visual Studio 2013 open already. So Okay, which one did I close? Okay, I'm still here. Oh, I think I closed down the Visual Studio with that. I shouldn't have closed down. Okay, fine. Let's quickly create a new project. Sorry about that. I went ahead and then closed my Visual Studio, which is already there. So let me open the web application one. This is what we just created, a blank, empty ASP.NET web application. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and then add maybe, web forms can be added anytime. There's not much of a difference with the web forms. You can just say right click and say add new item. But the beauty now is I can add MVC controllers now. This is an empty project. I never said this is an MVC project, but when I go ahead and then say add new scaffolded item with MVC controller, it goes ahead and then puts all the references that is required for MVC, meaning the system.mvc.dll, all those things. And if you know MVC, you know that MVC goes by the conventions rather than configuration, meaning any class which ends with controller, and then it looks for a folder called views, and then inside that the controller name, and then the the views should be kept there. So these are all. This is not the one. Just give me a second. Let's think it was web application 2. So let me quickly open up web application 2, which was an empty template. Where did it go? Okay, anyway, I'll create a new one. ASP.NET application, web application 3, empty, and then I'll say okay. Bear with me for a couple of more seconds. We'll have an empty project and then I'll add the MVC stuff. So there we go. So it's creating, it's created. So let me just quickly save the solution. Now I'm going to say right click, add, and then I'm going to select new scaffolded item. Okay. Now here's going to see a brand new dialog that you have never seen. So this is the add scaffold dialog, and what you see is somebody was asking previously that what are the inbuilt scaffolding generators available. So there you go. So we have for MVC we have the area generator. So I can just directly now select the area generator. So I can just say the area as admin maybe. Just let's try to go ahead and then do one by one. So now what this is doing is, when I selected the template as empty, it didn't know anything about what is an MVC, what is an MVC feature, everything. So now when I said, hey, I want to create an MVC area, in this application, it's going to go ahead, scaffold it in terms of it's going to go and add an area folder. Under the area folder, it's going to create controller model view folders. Then it's going to go and then create the route for the area, all those things. Now it's going to do all the magic at the back end. In the background. So this is, mind you, a Visual Studio tooling feature. This scaffolding is a Visual Studio tooling. It's not got to do with the ASP.NET, but it's in the sense, it requires all those configuration. Yes, that's the ASP.NET part of it, but what you see, the dialog is actually the Visual Studio tooling. We call it as Visual Studio tooling. So the tooling is so smart that you just have to say, I want to create MVC area now in this project, and then it figures out, is this project already containing MVC features or no? Okay, I have to add the MVC features. If it already had MVC features, it will just go ahead and then create the folders, all those things. So let's give it a couple of seconds. It's doing the scaffolding now. Boom. I don't know if you guys noticed or not, but let me open up the Solution Explorer again. Oh, we've just done a lot of stuff. We had only 3 things. That is the properties tab, node, and then put Visual Studio 2013 works. The UI layout is completely bootstrapped. Having audio issues, we have it recorded. Sorry about that. I think my machine is kind of overloaded. So maybe that's why. Yeah, I know many of you are saying audio not clear, so please bear with us. I think my system is overloaded, and then the audio is getting choppy, so I apologize for that. We will have the recorded version. If the recorded version is not up to mark, I will re-record it and then put the recording. So in a way, it will be like clean audio for you guys. So what it has done is it has gone ahead and created the bundle.config. It has gone ahead and then created the filter.config. This is basically filter that you would add, so we can add. So there's an handle error attribute. Plus it has created the route.config, and then it has this so here's the route.config, and not only that, it has created my areas called as admin. Look at the controllers, models, views, and then admin area registration. So there's the area name and then admin underscore default. So that's the route name. So any URI which is like / admin / home or whatever it is, I can start doing that. Plus it has gone ahead and then added the models, scripts, views, all those things. Plus in the global.asx, it would have added a line of code, area.registration, register at all areas, filter, route, bundle config. So that's what the scaffolding will be able to do. Now, can I go ahead and add an MVC view into this? Yes, you can. What you have to do is just go to controller. So before that, let's do one thing. I'll just quickly add a particular I'll create a simple class file. Let's call it as a person. So just give me a couple of seconds. So I'm just trying to add a new class. I'll call the class as a person class, and I'll try to create just 3 simple, let me call this as a person class. So in the person class, what I want to do is I just want to create a property int. Yes, it has an ID, and then property string. I'll just call it as a name, and then I'll create a property string again, and I'll say Twitter handle. Yeah, that's all. Just this bare bone minimal class. So let me go ahead and then compile this. And now I'm going to show you a cool thing. Now what I want to do is, how much time will it take for you to create a listing page, a editing page, a updating page, a deleting page for this person? Now I want to kind of do a CRUD operation on this person, right? Just imagine if you had to kind of take a guess or do an kind of a estimation as to, if somebody comes and says, we have this person entity, we need a CRUD screen for person entity. How much time will it take for you, right? Just take a guess. It's up to you. I mean, there's a question like, should we create the model anywhere, or should we create it in models folder? It's a my practice. Any model that I have, any domain models, any model that I entity that I model, I keep it in models, because that's why the folder name itself is model. So I know that all my models are here. So it doesn't matter anyway. Everything goes by the namespace, so it doesn't matter. 4 to 5. Somebody is saying 4 to 5 hours. Okay, now start your clock. Let's see how much time it takes. So now I'm going to say right click on this. Again, I will go to add new scaffolded item. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select controller. Okay, remember what I'm doing? I just said add new scaffolded item, and I will select MVC5 controller with views using entity framework, right? I'm going to say add. I will say this is person controller, and I want to use the person model that I just created. Oh, I don't have any data context as of now. Fine, not a problem. What I will do is I will click on new data context, and I will say I need a person context or person DB context. Okay, and I will say add, and I'll click again, and the layout page is already created, so I'll say that's fine. So I'll go ahead and say add. So now what it is doing is it is going to go ahead and create first an entity framework code first context file, and then add a DB set to that. Our DB set is nothing but persons, and then it is going to go and then create an MVC controller called person controller, and the person controller will have complete CRUD operations into that. That is create, read, update, delete. Not only that, it will go ahead and then create a views folder. In the views folder, it's going to go and create the person folder. In the person folder, it will create create.cshtml, read.cshtml, update.cshtml, delete.cshtml. And that's it. I mean, I'm all done. I can prove that this is all. If you remember, I did only 2 clicks, and then I can get a particular website up and running in minutes. You know, somebody I'm seeing the Q&A panel, and then people are saying, like, you know, it takes 4 to 5 hours to create the card. It takes 1 to 2 hours to create the card. You know, all those things. So now, bear with me. If I had today my machine is running a little bit slow because I have a lot of things. You know, the GTM is running. So that's why the scaffolding is taking a little bit of time, like a minute or so. But if you have a pretty good fast laptop, it's all in a matter of seconds. So it's saying, hey, I'm done. I mean, that's just because web.config I had opened it, so it's asking me, you know, what should I do? Now, let me show you what it did. So let me drag my Solution Explorer. Okay, first thing that it did was it created this, you know, person controller. And if you see here, it also went ahead and then created the views person folder, create, delete, details, edit, index. Okay. Plus, not only that, can you guys see this? This is, let me take it a little bit up. Here it is. This is the entity framework context, the person DB context. Okay. So this is pretty much, if I double click on this, let me dock my Solution Explorer to the right hand side. There you go. You see this is the entity framework code first. It is looking for, it is a person DB context. It is inheriting from DB context. It is looking for a connection string called person DB context. So we can go back to the web.config. You will see that it would have created a connection string for me. So here we go. Here's the connection string. It says connection strings add name person DB context. Connection string is local DB v11.0. Initial catalog is here. Integrated security is true. Where should the DB be created? It should be created in the data directory and some MDF name. So I can change it if I want. But this is the local DB context. Now, if we look at the person DB context, there's nothing, you know, hardly anything, right? So it has a DB set and says person, and look at this, you know, this is the intelligence they have built. They know that if there is more than one person, you call them as people, right? You know, you don't say person, you know, one person, two person, rather you say people. So they automatically pluralize the words. So it's known as people, but it is of type person, DB set of person. And now let's look at the person controller. No, this is the person controller. This is the MVC controller, correct? So it has neatly said, instantiated the context. Here is the index. It says view db.people.toList details. If I say person details /1, it will go ahead and then say, hey, find the people or find the person with ID so and so. Create. It gives me a create screen. When I'm posting the form for creation, so here is the HTTP post for create. So everything has been written down. You know, I don't have to do anything. So basically, those of you who are asking how did it select the database to be connected to, you know, remember what I said? I created a DB context by the name person DB context. So here is the definition for person DB context. Notice the constructor. It's the base will always take a connection string. So the connection string it is saying is go and then figure out a connection string with the name person DB context. If I go to the web.config, the web.config already gets updated with this connection string called as person DB context, and there is a connection string that is it's using the Visual Studio 2012 feature that came out in 2012 called as local DB. So you do not have to do anything. It will automatically instantiate this instance, and there will be a database created with this name, and the physical file will be stored in the app_data folder. So it's pretty similar to whatever was happening before. There's nothing new in this one. But what I want to show is the scaffolding has already done everything for me, the controller, the person DB context. Now if I go and then look at my index.cshtml of person, so I'm opening up the views folder, then person/index. So there you go. So it has created a typed view. I mean, remember in the person controller, if you go to person controller and look at the index, I'm passing I enumerable of people, a person, right? So remember, this is what we are passing. So if you look at the index, it has created the typed model saying like, hey, your model is I enumerable of person. And then not only that, you see this, there is a table neatly written, then it says for each item in the model, I want you to go through and then create it, right? So now let's do one thing. Let's build this and then run it. Notice, I think we are in admin/person, so we would have to do that. So let's run this. There's a question like, can scaffolding be used for complex applications and mobile applications as well? Basically, it depends. Whenever you're creating a new controller, it's fairly time consuming to create each views for that. So what you can do is you can use the scaffolding feature and then get the bare bone templates out, and then you can come in and then customize. At least your bare bone template, or what we call as a boilerplate template for the CRUD, is already created by the tool itself. You don't have to do anything, right? So it automatically does. And only thing that you would have to come and do is maybe add a new field or remove a field or whatever, depending on your project needs. So I would say, don't handcraft any of the views. Use the scaffolding and then say, hey, here's a controller. You don't have to create the entity framework also, because if you're in a project where entity framework is already there, you can always say, hey, use this entity framework when you're creating this view controller. So I can show you that now. I don't want to create, but I want to use the controller that is already the context that is already there. So give me a little bit of time. Let's give it a little bit of couple of seconds. As you can see, it has automatically gone to admin/person/index. Now you saw me coding 0. Now I'm going to show you full CRUD now. So let's give it a couple of seconds because it's priming up. For the first time when it starts, it's pretty much it takes a little bit of time to get primed up. So by the time, let me see if there's any somebody's asking, why is there a multiple folder named views? Yeah, basically what I did was, the example that I'm showing is, I went ahead and then said create a area, MVC area. So within every MVC area, you will have the controller model views folder. Plus what it has done is, at the root level also, it has created the controller model view folders. Ashish Jain, you're asking for how do we create scaffolding for child and parent relationship of model in a single view. I'm not sure what exactly is the question. Maybe you're asking like, I have a person has a list of emails, so how do I create a scaffolding maybe for that? Well, as I said, by default, the inbuilt scaffolding has its own way of it is doing currently for maybe a straightforward single classes, but you can always go ahead, create your own scaffolder. It's known as a custom scaffolding, and then it's pretty simple. Maybe we'll do similar topic in future, but it's pretty similar. It's simple. You just create a PowerShell script and say, this is how I want the new scaffolded class to look like. So it will give you everything, and you can pretty much do a lot of programming on your scaffolding. It's a template. It's a code template. It's not a new technology. Rather, we used to have something known as T4 template. So basically, under the hood, it's doing this T4 templating under the hood. So you can create your own T4 template where you say, and you can come back, instead of you seeing me saying like MVC area scaffold, you can go to the package manager console and say scaffold, custom scaffolding, and then give your template. And then in your template, you would have written like, hey, I have a person. So first spit out person row, and then within that row, I want you to loop through the emails and then spit out the email. So you can write that custom. Yeah, it's taking a little bit of time because my system is completely running slow today. Sorry about that. So let's give it a couple of seconds. Basically, you should know PowerShell script in order to customize the scaffolding. Meaning, you cannot customize whatever the inbuilt scaffolders are there, but you can use them and then create your own scaffolding. But it's all based on a PowerShell scripting. Visual Studio 2012 already has all this scaffolding. If you are doing MVC or a web API, you already have it. You just have to say right click and say, I'm not sure about the MVC scaffolding with entity framework context in 2012. I'm pretty sure 2012 has the scaffolding for, what do you call scaffolding for controllers, scaffolding for views, scaffolding for API controller. So I'm not sure about the entity framework. So there you go. it's everything is created. Now let me click on create new. I'm going to quickly go ahead and then create our team with their Twitter handle. So you saw me writing zero code, remember that, okay? So now I'm going to say, here is my boss. So let's put first my boss. So I will say his Twitter handle is Abhishek Kant. I will say create. And it's going to just take a couple of seconds, and there you go. If you're thinking I did some magic, let me refresh it. Well, after refreshing also the data is coming. Okay, so now let me go and then say create new. I will say Lohit, and then I will say my Twitter handle is this, and I will say create. And I will say create. And my team has one more member, and that is Dhananjay Kumar, and his Twitter handle is debug_mode. Well, I did a mistake. My name is not Lohit. I need my last name to be there, right? So let's go ahead and create an edit. Edit my details. Correct. So I will say Lohit G space N and save it. There you go. It got updated. So let's check the details of Lohit again. There you go. So this is the details screen. I can go to edit screen from here. I can go back to the list. Everything was done within zero coding. That's the scaffolding that I'm talking about. Now this is fine. What about web API? Let's go ahead and then add a web API, right? This is fine, but I want a web API now for the same maybe context. So what we'll do is we'll go to admin controllers. I'll say right click, add new scaffolded item, and I will say web API. Now notice what all the things you get. You can create a web API controller empty, web API controller with actions using entity framework, web API controller with read write. Not only that, I can do web API with OData controller. OData is my favorite topic, so I can create a web API OData controller, all those things. So for this, what I'm going to do is, this is an unscripted, so let's see how it goes. I'm going to pick up entity framework. So I will say this is person API controller. Here is the fantastic feature that ASP.NET team has done. If you guys can look at this, it has already picked up the DB context that is already there in the project. I didn't have to tell it that, hey, I want a new context. No, it knows that there is already a context. Hey, I know I've seen a context here. I will pick it up. If you don't want, you create a new one. This is perfect for me. So all I have to do is I have to say I want person. Okay, so I just say person API controller, person DB context. I'll say go ahead and then add. So now all it does is it's going to go and create an API, web API controller for me. So remember, I started out with empty template, and then I added MVC feature to that. Now I'm adding web API template to that. So this is what one ASP.NET is all about. You can pretty much do all ASP.NET features or all ASP.NET flavors, as I call it, within single web application. So that is the flexibility that you get now. At any point of time, you can just come back and then say, okay, let's add a web form now. Yeah, it will work. Or maybe you can 6 months down the line, you can come and say, oh, I think we need a MVC area now within this app. Yeah, you can do it. You just saw me doing that. There you go. Look at what they do. They say, once we create a web API, they give you a README. It says Visual Studio has added the full set of dependency for ASP.NET Web API 2 to the particular project. The global.aspx file in the project may require additional changes to enable ASP.NET Web API. Add the following namespace references. So that is web.http, web.routing. If the code does not already define an application start, add the following method, and then I want you to call this, correct? So let's see our global.acx. So I'm opening the global.acx, and does it have these two HTTP and web routing? It doesn't have. Web routing is already there, but it doesn't have the web HTTP. So what I will do is I will go ahead and then add Sorry about that. I had a little bit of, my mouse got, it was unresponsive for a moment. So just bear with me. So what I've done is, so the system.web.http I've added. So the readme.txt said, we need to add this particular line. So let's copy this line, and then we will add it here. So what it has done is it has already created a web API config class for me. So let's go back to this web API config. All it does is it's just going to go and then say map the HTTP route. So that's all it does. Okay. Now let's look at our controller. Remember we created a controller called person API controller. So here it is. So this person API controller, remember I told it to use person DB context. Well, it's already done. It's using the person DB context. Look at this. I have API/person API. API/person API/5, all those things. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to run this. Well, somebody is asking what the web API config will do. Web API config will, add routes of web API, meaning it's a HTTP route. It's not an MVC route. The route config will add the MVC routes, will configure the MVC routes. Web API config will configure the web API routes, meaning they are HTTP routes. They are not the MVC routes. So now I'm going to bring up one of my favorite tools. That is, in Chrome there is a extension known as Postman. It's a quick and easy way to figure out or go and then execute REST calls. So I'm going to launch Postman. So here is the web application just come up. We'll give it a little bit of time. It's coming up now. Well, I don't have anything in the route, so let me stop at the route. So I have my MVC routes available at admin/person. So this is where our MVC routes are currently placed. Now I'll bring back Postman, and I will say, hey Postman, at HTTP localhost :27419/API, there is a person API. I want you to execute that. So let's get the web application primed up. Just bear with me for a couple of more seconds. So just let me go over once again what we did. So basically we created an empty project. For that empty project, we just added an MVC area, or you can say we just added an MVC feature. To that same project, we then added a web API feature. And now what we are going to see is, both working in tandem. That is, I have an MVC route that's going to work, and then I have a web API that I'm going to show that, within the same project I've been able to add anything. So this is oneasp.net typically. Just go back to, forget there was nothing called oneasp.net, forget there's something called as Visual Studio 2013. If you are in Visual Studio 2012, you need to create different project for web API. You need to create different project for MVC. So, that was a confusion that pretty much we had in the prior to 2013. So, but with 2013, it's all gone. You can start with an empty, and then slowly, if you want, keep adding whatever you want, because under the hood, it's all ASP.NET. It's an ASP.NET application. So let's give it a couple of seconds. Today my system is too slow. Just bear with me for a couple of seconds. In the meantime, let me see if there is any questions. I think I answered. You're asking for how do you check integrity and names? Well, I haven't done anything on the validation part of it. If I had attributed my models with attribution like required, string length or min length, max length, all those constraints, if I had put on my models, the way all these edit screens are done are they use the unobtrusive JavaScript validation, jQuery validation, so it will automatically do the validation for me. It will make sure. I'm not sure when you guys say is it secure. What exactly are you guys hinting at when you say secure? Because I have a JavaScript validation on the client side, and there will be a JavaScript validation on the, there will be a model validation on the server side. So I'm checking for anything which is not supposed to happen on both client and server side. It's a best practice. I've heard people saying like, I want to disable what we call the validation on server side. Never ever disable validation on server side. You never know, somebody can just hit your MVC route through a curl, like a command line HTTP call, and then that's it. So now what it has done is I have it's primed up. So let's go back to the Postman, and then in the Postman what I will do is I will say go get person API. So let me send. What happened? Hang on, let me check what's my API. It's API / person API, yes, but where is create? It's created. Let me check my web API config. Yeah, that's correct. So it's throwing me a 404. Just let me check what's happening. It's API and person API. Yes, this is API, person API. Why is it throwing 404? Let me check. Interesting. So where is it at? Is it at admin / API? Just give me a second. By the time I figure this out, there's a little small problem that I think I'm missing what the route I have to pass. In the web.api config, we have said the default API is API / controller / ID. That's correct. And where is my person API controller? It is here. It's in the admin. It doesn't matter where it is. Areas, admin controllers, person API controller. It's following API controller. Huh. It says it can't find it, so it's a route problem. Okay, let me do one thing. Let me delete this guy for a moment. Yeah, it got messed up. Like, what is happening is the API controller is in the admin. So what I need to do is so we have the admin area. So it goes to the admin / controller and then this. Whereas in the web API config, it will say default API / controller / ID. Well, let's try that again. So what I will do is, let me remove this guy for a while, because that's just the one class. So what I will do is, let's say I'm going to go ahead and then create it in the outside. So just to make sure, there's nothing, it's just a path collision. I need to make sure that I can create the paths, route the maps correctly. There's another interesting thing. So now you can see that you do not have to always go new scaffolded item. You can always say web controller class. You'll have the web form. You'll have all those things available here. But still, we'll go ahead and then do a add new scaffolded item, and then I will say web API controller with actions using entity framework, and I will say this is person API. And it will use the person class. It will still use the person thing. So now what we should happen is it's now getting created in the outside, meaning it's going to be available /API. Most probably what happened was the areas /admin, slash, there's a collision. I just have to deconflict that. But in the meantime, in the interest of the time, we already 402. So let's quickly see what happens with this. So again, it does the same thing. It doesn't change pretty much. So if you look at the web API config, it will be the same because it already has the entries. So I have global. Oh, I think I know what was happening. So we would have to do this guy here because I want this guy maybe to do that. So everything else is the same. Instead, I just created outside so that it will be like I don't have to worry about admin, all those things. In MVC, this is a little bit tricky. You got to understand the routing correct. Who's coming first, or like there'll be a conflicts sometimes. So you just have to make sure you resolve the conflicts. In the meantime, by the time it loads up, let me check if there's any questions. We are currently overboard, but this is pretty much what I had in for the demos. Yeah, I mean, there's a question by somebody like, can I add more fields to the, edit or delete data? I want to accept person and his, yeah, you can create it, but as I said, the scaffolding currently, the inbuilt scaffolding will look at only one set of data. If you have, you can actually go and then create a foreign key kind of thing, and then it will actually lay out completely, vertical, meaning it will just put everybody there, and then it will automatically model bind at the runtime. Meaning, what I'm trying to say is, if Kottai Krishnamurthy, you're asking for scaffolding is a Visual Studio tool, so this will be available for Windows application also, right? No, the scaffolding is very specific to ASP.NET. That's what I said, scaffolding in on ASP.NET. So this has got nothing to do with your other things. Although this is a Visual Studio tooling, this tooling is available or applicable only for ASP.NET applications. It cannot be put for other applications. Pretty much it's currently only for the ASP.NET. Sri Kumar, that's what I said. Currently in the RTM, that is Visual Studio 2013 RTM, what has happened is they have removed I have been using Visual Studio 2013 from the preview days. Whenever the first initial drop for general public was available, it was like a RC1 or RC2 or something like that. So they had plans for scaffolding of web forms. When you say .aspx, it's a web form page. So yes, there was a plan for creating CRUD pages for web forms, but at the RTM level, they did find some technical difficulties, or we don't know what exactly, but it was pulled out of the release. So we have only the MVC and Web API scaffolding at the moment in Visual Studio 2013 for ASP.NET. So now this has come up. So let me say admin/person. So I should get this page, and let's go back here, and let's say I have API/person API and then send. Let me take a couple of questions. Can this be hosted on IIS6? Yeah, I mean, it depends. There are certain things you would have to take care of it. The IIS6 to IIS8, there are a lot of differences. Web API would require you to have .NET 4.5. So if you can move your server to .NET 4.5 and then IIS, there are certain settings that you would need to do. It should work. Visual Studio 2005, I'm not sure of that. The question is, Visual Studio 2005, does any additional tool are required to work for scaffolding? I'm not 100% sure if the scaffolding will be available on Visual Studio 2005. As far as I know, the scaffolding was introduced in Visual Studio 2012. And then in 2013, it's a full-blown, fully baked up thing. I'm not sure. I would have to check on that. Or, I mean, you would have to check with somebody in the Microsoft team itself, like what is the scenario in Visual Studio 2005. If you are working in 2005, I believe your project is way too old. There you go. Now we just created, so here is the MVC pages are still coming up, but here is Postman. Using Postman, what I did was I was able to issue a request to API/person API, and then there you go. I'm getting the JSON data back, because Web API by default will look at what's the header. I'm sending a header. No, I'm not sending a header, but I can say accept, and then I'll say text/JSON. I accept only text/JSON, so I'll say send. And there you go, I got it back. Now I can come back here and then say, no, I want to see the details of only person 1. So it will go and then issue, it will go and get data for only ID 1. So there you go, I can go and then issue maybe ID 3. So I'll see 3 now. So what I'm going to say is, I have an MVC added, and I have a web API added to an empty ASP.NET web application. So that's one ASP.NET, ladies and gentlemen, for you guys. That was a quick overview of the scaffolding that is available in one ASP.NET. It's a pretty cool technology, or pretty cool tooling. I would request you all to play with it, try to see how your productivity can improve. Because whenever you have to create a CRUD screen, all you have to do is just use scaffolding, let it create the boilerplate code for you, and then you can always customize on top of that. So I'm done with all the presentation materials. So we saw web forms, we saw MVC scaffolding, we saw web API scaffolding. I'm going to now take a look at the question and answer. So the floor is open for Q&A. If you have any questions, keep logging. I'll keep looking and then pick up one by one. If you need more information about Telerik or anything, in specific, you can always talk to me, write to me at lohit.nagraj@telerik.com. My Twitter handle is KSHYAPA. It's Kashyapa. So take a look at that. Somebody is asking, can you give basic brief of Web API? Well, Web API is nothing but a service, kind of a service that you create using ASP.NET, but it is more geared towards HTTP communication. I mean, meaning anybody in this world who understands HTTP, get, put, post, delete, can actually communicate with the Web API, and then Web API's communication is built on the premise of HTTP verbs. Web API understands all the HTTP verbs like get, put, post, delete. So that's what Web API is all about. Then now I'm able to host Web API created using Visual Studio on IIS 6. Yeah, I mean IIS 6 and then Web API hosting. There is a very specific documentation that Microsoft has given, because you need .NET 4.5 for Web API to work. So pretty much on your server which is hosting IIS 6, you need to make sure that you have .NET runtime 4.5 installed, and then you would have to do certain settings in the IIS itself or the web.config. So yeah, there are very specific documentations available for this. Rajesh, your question is Web API replacement for web service or WCF? Certainly not. When you say web service, WCF is a web service, right? Web service is a very generic terminology. I can create a web service using Web API. I can create a web service using WCF. So it's pretty much depends on what you want to do. Everybody has this confusion, but I always tell them one thing. If your client is a WCF guy, I mean, if your client is a .NET guy, there's nothing better than WCF. Like just create a WCF and then exchange data using the SOAP protocol or whatever. So you got to understand the protocols here. WCF uses SOAP protocol, so it may be an overhead. If you create a WCF and then you're creating a mobile application, you cannot expect somebody on a mobile to actually communicate with you to your WCF using SOAP protocol, because SOAP, as you know, has a lot of overhead in the envelope itself. The body, the header, everything is XML, and it's a huge payload. And mind you, in India or anywhere, like your 3Gs, your 2Gs, your edge, it's very the bandwidth is very small, so you cannot expect somebody to communicate with your WCF over these 2G, 3G. So the best one is to you in those scenarios, the best way is to create a web API. Since web API can understand HTTP, somebody can just issue a HTTP GET or somebody can issue a HTTP POST. And then since it can return back a JSON, the payload is very small, so your mobile applications also will be faster responsive. So this is how you got to understand, should I go for WCF or should I go for web API? If you are targeting, if your service is going to be consumed by non-Microsoft technologies, like somebody from Android, somebody from iOS, somebody from Java world, they want to consume, the better way would be to be on completely web API, which is completely HTTP communication. You can create a what we call as a RESTful service using WCF, but it is not 100% HTTP oriented. Is there any separate DLL for scaffolding? Not exactly. It's all baked into the Visual Studio, so you do not have to worry about that. No, question is, can WCF be used as a controller? No, MVC follows its own way, so you cannot use a WCF as a controller. Web API is not a MVC controller. Web API is its own standalone controller. Basically, it there is a separate route for that, and it's used only for HTTP communication. Like I want to consume only the data, so this is like a data service. Web API is a data service. Is scaffold available for Visual Studio 2012? Absolutely. As I said, I'm not sure if the scaffolding of what I showed is available. That is, create a controller view and entity framework data context in one shot. But if you go to your Visual Studio 2012, create a MVC project, right click on a controller folder, you will be able to create an empty controller or a read-write controller in all those things. Mani Prabha Kathiran, you're asking for how can I include scaffolding in your project. If you are on Visual Studio 2013 or if you are on Visual Studio 2012, it is already baked into Visual Studio. You do not have to bring in anything extra. Question is, WCF RESTful API is different from Web API in terms of protocol. Yeah, absolutely. The WCF follows SOAP protocol. Web API follows HTTP protocol. HTTP is all simple get, put, post, delete verbs. In Visual Studio 2012, you will not see what I showed you. That is, when I right-click on my project and I say add new item, you will see it says new scaffolded item. Yes, that is not there. But the pieces of this particular, things like, when I say new scaffolded item, it gives you a new dialog. So this dialog is not there in Visual Studio 2012. Rather, you have the single pieces. You can right-click on a controller and you can say create a empty controller, create a read-write controller. So all those things are available in 2012, but not this dialog. This dialog is one shop or one place to see all these things. So this is available in 2013. The WCF way of creating RESTful API, yes, it is available, but it is not 100% HTTP. Can we have paging and filtering with scaffolding? As I said, if you look at my person index page, it doesn't do paging and all. If I open up the person index page, it's a plain table. But what you can do is you can write your own custom scaffolding. So in that custom scaffolding, you can pretty much copy the same codes, but add your extra customization, like add a boot pager bar, or whatever you want to add, customize it. So you can customize it. That's known as custom scaffolding. So that's a completely different topic altogether. Yeah, I think the question is, can we have MVC ASPX page using scaffolding instead of Razor? Absolutely. MVC, you have two engines. One is a Razor engine, another one is a ASPX engine. So I'm much more inclined towards Razor because it is simple and then easy to do and then faster. In terms of coding, it is faster because it's simple. As you can see, at the rate, and then I can do anything. So if you had created the MVC project as in what do you call the you can create a Razor ASPX engine and then say I want to create the ASPX version of it, not the Razor version of it. Oh, well, question is, what is the difference between web application and web API? Web API is a data service in a layman's term. Web application is an application which contains a different pages. You have your CRUD pages coming up, all those things. Web API does not have any UI. Rather, web API is all about as the name says, it's an API. You invoke an API, it gives you a data back. Senthil Murugan, it's a very, very, kind of deep topic that you're asking for. WC have its own way of security using the Windows Identity Framework. How can you do with Web API service? You can still do that. What I can do is I can put my Web API in behind a kind of a forms authentication or a OAuth authentication, and then or I can say that whenever somebody is accessing a web API, I want a certificate in the header. Whenever somebody is accessing a web API, I want a token in the header, and then I can write interceptors for web API, and those interceptors, what they do is they first will authorize whether are you an authorized person to access this particular route, and if not, I can just send a 402, I believe, which is like unauthorized. So I can just do all those things in the web API. But yes, out of the box, when you create a web API controller, it's very simple. As I said, the controller, if you look at the patterns, what does the pattern say? Separation of concerns. The controller's concern is not about security. So you have something on top of these controllers that you would have to bring in, which acts as like an interceptor for each route. And that's the guy who should actually check if do you have the certificate in the header, or do you have a token in the header, or do you have an OAuth authorization in the header, and then he will say, okay, go ahead. It's like a gate. You put a gate before your building, right? Before your door. So that's the same concept here. It's 19 minutes past 4 o'clock. The scheduled time is 3 to 4. If anybody has to leave, we understand. Thank you very much for giving us your 1 hour, and I hope today's topic was kind of a primer for you on what exactly is 1ASP.NET, how do you do scaffolding in 1ASP.NET, and also the concept of now I can have web forms, MVC, web API, everything. If somebody is thinking like, we didn't do anything about web forms, well, I can directly go on and say, let me go back to the Solution Explorer, and then I can come back here and then right click on my root folder, root project route, and say add. And remember, there is a web form here, so I can directly say that. I can come back here, I can say add a web form. Let's name it as default, and I will say default.aspx, and all I will say is hello world, maybe, right? Okay, so just give me a couple of seconds. Yeah, there you go. So as you can see, this is the .aspx file, and I'm saying hello world from web forms, right? And then now when I run, what happens is, as you all know, default.html or default.aspx or index.html, these are the default pages that the web server will automatically, if somebody doesn't give me the page and just go to localhost or just go to the domain, it will automatically serve me this default page. So now we should see hello world from web forms. So as I said, those of you who have to part ways with the webinar, please go ahead. Thank you very much for your 1 hour. This will it will enrich your day experience in your project or in your career. We look forward to your presence in the future webinars. As I said, keep going to our blog telerichelper.net. So thank you very much for everybody for attending. If you want to stick around, please stick around. I still have time, maybe 10 more minutes. And then I will close the webinar. So thank you very much for your time. So as you can see, it's picked up my default.aspx. So I have shown you that with just one application, web application, you can have ASPX, you can have MVC, you can have API, web API. There you go. That's 1ASP.NET for you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. We look forward to your presence in the future webinars. If you have any questions or anything, my email ID will be flashed at the end. So I will keep this webinar open for 3 more minutes, and then I'll close this out. If you have any questions, please log it in the Q&A panel. I'll just keep looking at it and then I'll answer you. Thank you. So if you guys are still around, so as you can see, my web forms has come up. So I have default.aspx which says hello world from web forms. Now from this I can go to our MVC, which is admin person. So it will open up the MVC page. So there is a web forms page running, there's a MVC page running. And not only that, we have the web API running, so we still have the web API. So we have all the three things that we did in the single application. Well, OData is a new protocol that Microsoft is kind of trying to let the world know about that. So you should go and then look out in the odata.org. It's all about, OData stands for Open Data Protocol. So there's it's all protocol, meaning how do you exchange data between one person to another, or one service to another service. Like for example, there is a service and I want to consume that service. So the OData specification talk about how can a customer consumer talk to this OData producer, and then what are the things that OData producer should kind of have in its service. So with OData, everything can be done as a RESTful URI. So no more writing get people by ID, get people by city, get people by state, or get people by department. You know, you can the consumer has all the power. He can just build up the whatever filter mechanism or whatever sorting mechanism or whatever grouping mechanism in the URI, and then the OData producer will actually look at that and then return the data. You know, so it's just like one entry point, and then it's all OData link over the URI, and then automatically it will give you the data. So it's basically, it's a new protocol that is there. If you in .NET, you can create a OData service using WCF data services. And now with Web API, Web API also provides you the facility to actually return data in a OData protocol. And OAuth is open authentication. It's an industry-wide standard for example, if you are going into any website, and then you will see some you know, buttons which says authenticate yourself using Google, or authenticate yourself using Microsoft Live account, or authenticate yourself using Facebook. So what the site is doing is, the site is delegating the authorization to you know, Google, Facebook, or Microsoft, and saying like, hey, I let you authenticate and you tell me if he's an authorized guy or not. So that's the open authentication, like, you know, that's the standard. I'll just use and everybody will issue a token saying like, yes, I understand this guy is a valid user, and here's a token of his validity. So that's OpenAuth. So that's what, like, you know, as you can see, I have Web API running, I have the MVC running, and I also showed the web forms running. So if you have any other questions, you can log it. So we'll close this webinar in 4 minutes.